Brazilian judge revokes visa over U.S. allegations of political witch hunt. A dramatic escalation in U.S.-Brazil tensions has left the world watching as political clashes turn personal. The United States has revoked the visa of Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, the key figure overseeing the prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro, in a move echoing President Donald Trump's accusations that the judge is the victim of a political witch hunt. This moment marks a turning point in a rapidly deepening rift between the two nations, one that has already strained decades of diplomatic ties. The decision came just hours after Moraes accused Bolsonaro of conspiring with his son, Eduardo, to incite U.S. hostility against Brazil. The judge ordered Bolsonaro to wear an ankle bracelet, restricted his access to foreign governments, and barred him from contacting anyone involved in the investigation. Moraes's political witch hunt against Jair Bolsonaro created a persecution and censorship complex so sweeping that it not only violates basic rights of Brazilians, but also extends beyond Brazil's shores to target Americans, said Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who framed the action as a defense of free speech. This clash isn't just about legal battles, it's a reflection of deeper ideological divides. The US and Brazil are now at odds over Brazil's prosecution of Bolsonaro, who faces decades in prison for alleged plots to retain power after losing the 2022 election. They also disagree on the limits of free speech, especially when social media platforms cross national borders. Moraes, the central figure in this conflict, has taken a hardline approach, ordering the takedown of at least 120 social media accounts he claims violate Brazil's laws. His actions have put him at odds with US tech companies and Trump's allies, who see him as a threat to American interests. But here's where it gets controversial. The US has not only revoked Moraes's visa but also those of his allies on the court and their families. This move raises questions about the broader implications. Will it deter Moraes from continuing his investigations? Or does it signal a shift toward using diplomacy as a tool of coercion? The answer remains unclear, but one thing is certain. The diplomatic feud between the US and Brazil is not heading toward a quick resolution. The conflict erupted on July 9 when Trump announced a 50% tariff on Brazil, citing Bolsonaro's prosecution and what he called the Brazilian Supreme Court's unlawful suppression of free speech. In a viral post to Truth Social, Trump wrote to Bolsonaro, his closest ally on the far right, lamenting his terrible treatment and demanding his trial end immediately. "I will be watching," Trump said, setting the tone for a battle that would soon involve the entire nation. Moraes escalated the pressure, targeting Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, a congressman accused of working with his father to destabilize Brazil. The judge's order described their actions as willfully and consciously acting with illicit intent to undermine the Supreme Court. Bolsonaro's defense team called the restrictions severe, while Eduardo responded with frustration, calling Moraes a dictator using the court as a personal weapon. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva condemned Bolsonaro supporters as traitors who prioritize Trump over Brazil's interests. For weeks, Eduardo has met with Trump officials, pushing for sanctions against Moraes. A right-wing influencer, Paulo Figueiredo, has also been involved, having been charged in the 2022 coup plot. These efforts have drawn scrutiny, with reports suggesting Eduardo has received both legal and financial backing from his father. The situation has reached a boiling point. As Eduardo stated, "We won't stop. Silencing my father will not quiet Brazil." But what does this mean for Brazil's future under a leader who once called himself a national hero? The answer may lie in how the US and Brazil navigate this crisis, whether through dialogue or confrontation. One thing is clear: the world is watching, and the stakes have never been higher. Eduardo Bolsonaro's US lobbying, pressure on Brazil's Supreme Court and political turmoil explained. Eduardo Bolsonaro's unprecedented influence in US-Brazil relations. Eduardo Bolsonaro, the third son of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, is creating a stir that far surpasses his initial intentions. The 41-year-old has found himself residing in the United States since February, facing scrutiny back home in Brazil related to allegations of his involvement in his father's correlated legal troubles. Known informally as Number 3, a title his father affectionately gave him in a manner reminiscent of military structure, Eduardo has been engaging actively with White House officials. His advocacy has led to calls for US sanctions against Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who is currently overseeing the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro for alleged attempts to overturn the election results that favored the now President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in 2022. Moraes is infamous for his decisive actions against misinformation, including temporarily banning Elon Musk's social media platform X in Brazil due to its failure to comply with legal orders aimed at curbing false narratives during the contentious 2022 presidential elections. But here's where it gets controversial. US President Donald Trump has publicly supported Jair Bolsonaro, initially sending a letter to Lula insisting that the case against Bolsonaro should be dismissed. As the situation intensified, he brandished a familiar tool of political leverage: tariffs. He has gone as far as to threaten a staggering 50% import tax on Brazilian goods, labeling the prosecution as a witch hunt that needs an immediate end. In response to this unfolding drama, Brazil's Supreme Court has taken significant measures, including issuing search warrants and orders restricting Jair Bolsonaro's communication with foreign officials amid accusations of attempting to solicit Trump's intercession in this legal matter. Authorities have even conducted a police raid on Bolsonaro's residence and mandated him to wear an ankle monitor for added surveillance. Adding to his woes, Bolsonaro is prohibited from using social media and communicating with foreign embassies, a decision that Justice Moraes justified by citing a valid concern over the potential for the former president to flee Brazil. Moraes characterized the actions of both Jair and Eduardo Bolsonaro as hostile towards the integrity of Brazil itself. In a swift move, Washington retaliated by imposing visa sanctions against Moraes. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned the court's actions as a politically motivated witch hunt, leading to immediate visa cancellations not only for Moraes but also his associates and their families. Notably, Trump's tariff threats appear to have inadvertently strengthened the leftist government in Brazil. According to Nicolas Saldias, an analyst from the Economist Intelligence Unit, Lula, who has recently adopted a blue cap inscribed with the phrase "Brazil belongs to the Brazilians," stands to gain considerable support from these developments. Saldias posits that Lula may be perceived as a champion of Brazilian nationalism, transforming into a figure of progressive nationalism at this critical juncture. In a bid to maintain his public persona, Eduardo Bolsonaro declared this week that he and his father would have stanchly opposed the tariffs if they were in a different position, alluding to the troubling dynamics escalated by Lula's provocative stance towards the US. "I don't even have a passport," he lamented, hinting at his current constraints. The diplomat in the shadows. Although Jair Bolsonaro may lack a passport, Eduardo, who was born in Rio de Janeiro and has served as a federal deputy in Sao Paulo since 2015, exudes a distinct diplomatic flair, effectively wielding his traveling privileges. Recently, he shared a video on his YouTube channel, with over 1 million subscribers, recorded just outside the White House. In it, he mentioned wrapping up a series of discussions with U.S. officials, hinting at forthcoming sanctions against Justice Moraes. A far-right influencer named Paulo Figueiredo, who is embroiled in the coup-related allegations, indicated that he, too, has engaged with U.S. authorities about Brazil, stressing that decisions concerning the nation were high on their agenda. Eduardo's role as an informal ambassador for his father's administration isn't new. As the only proficient English speaker within the Bolsonaro family, he began to serve a quasi-diplomatic role during his father's election campaign. His connection to the late far-right ideologue Olavo de Carvalho, who resided in the US, and one of Carvalho's close followers, Felipe Martins, facilitated his entry into the international political spotlight. Eduardo embraced Carvalho's ideological network, forging ties with figures like Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former chief strategist. This interaction has allowed them to infuse Trump-esque populism into Brazilian political discourse. In a revealing 2019 interview, Eduardo described his rapport with Bannon as a meeting of conservative minds, asserting that accusations of extremism leveled at Bannon never deterred him. He even viewed such scrutiny as a badge of honor. Initially, Bolsonaro intended to nominate Eduardo as Brazil's ambassador to Washington, but the young politician faced formidable opposition that thwarted this ambition. Ultimately, he retracted his candidacy, declaring amidst rising pressures that he would remain in Brazil to bolster conservative principles and to support his father's government. "I'm staying to ensure the tsunami of the 2018 election becomes a permanent wave," he proclaimed, an assertion he has rigorously upheld throughout the past 7 years. As discussions around this evolving geopolitical landscape unfold, where do you stand? Is Eduardo Bolsonaro's maneuvering a sign of savvy diplomacy or a misstep in the broader narrative? Share your thoughts below.